Well, it's the first week of November 2013. Some people gauge time passing by how old they are when their birthdays are, and some people have calendars. And David Patrick has a calendar every year. Has it been a year since we sat in this chair?
Yeah, I think it's probably about a year and a week or so.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
We're at Celine Paquette's History Center, the Samuel de Champlain History Center in Champlain. I love this building. We've talked about it before. We thank her for allowing us to come in here. You probably got your own key, though, right?
Yeah, I do.
It just happens, David, that I was at Border Press with our friend Jim Rochester and his family the other day. I walked in the door and he goes, I said, oh, I can smell the ink. It's not even dry yet. And here we are with the 2014 Town of Champlain Historic Calendar. And I said, what's the theory? What's the focus this year? And I looked at the front. And I heard you worked harder on this one than you ever worked.
Every calendar is different, and this calendar here, it's definitely something I put a lot of time in, especially in the last month.
Is there any calendar you've ever done that you didn't put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours in, David?
It's hard to count because a lot of times the product of my calendars start earlier in the year or even some years before where I work on a particular project, get it to a certain point. But I'm putting in a lot of time during the whole year, and then I have to devote a certain amount of time to put in, to make it into the calendar form. But I don't know how much time I put in, getting it to that point where it's ready.
I'm glad it wasn't up to me to calculate the total number of hours you spent any year. This one, it's obvious that you put an almost inordinate amount of time in it. Let's just, in the beginning of the program, explain to our viewers on Hometown Cable in our little corner the history of this calendar, why you do it, and what it's all about every year.
So anyway, the calendar, as people know, I have a big interest in Champlain history. I'm related to Pliny Moore, who surveyed the land, 1785-86, and related to the McClellans, and then related to the Knights who built the Savoy. And so there's a lot of history out there, and a lot of that history was saved, it's at various places, including special collections in the Feinberg Library that Hugh McClellan had, collected this material. So I've been able to utilize the material and the photographs, and what I, wanted to do was come out with some sort of mass-produced publication where it wasn't just a few copies printed, it was something everyone could enjoy on various different subjects. So I started that in 2003 with a very small calendar with only 3 pages of essay, which was just more or less filler in the back.
Yeah.
And now this is my 12th calendar, and it's progressed from 3 pages to 7 to 11. Now, from a number of years, I've been doing 15 pages, which is 15 pages additional to the photographs. And my whole concept when I did the calendar was to do something where I could print large format pictures, high quality, and not in a small picture book, that's like a 4x6, but really an 8x10.
I was talking with people about this calendar the other night in anticipation of coming here. I had forgotten about it entirely until Jim Rochester handed me that. And I am so impressed with the work you do. I know you don't do this so people will say, oh, David, what a beautiful job you did. But it's awfully nice to be recognized when you burn that midnight oil.
Yeah, and what's great about doing these things is actually I learn a lot about the subjects.
How can you not?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not a expert on every subject here, but when you start a subject, you don't really know much about it. We'll talk about it, when we get into the calendar, certain things where all I have is a picture, and then I start investigating about it, and then I learn so much about that one particular, subject. But, every year it's a different subject. And, I've done 2 calendars for the War of 1812, 2 calendars for the founding of Champlain, by Pliny Moore, showing his land grants. the burying yards in Champlain, the roads and bridges in town. I mean, these are all, I always like to say, connecting the dots, where you just take all this information, it could be at the Clinton County Historical Association, Feinberg Library, the History Center here, newspapers, and it's all out there, and you're putting it together and connecting the dots.
That's one of my favorite phrases, connecting
I,
the
I, I
dots.
say that all the time. That's
I
really
do it all the time because
Yeah.
I think that's what life is all about. We spend our whole lifetime
Yeah,
connecting the dots. I don't know when the picture will be complete,
it'll never be. That's the problem.
but you've done a magnificent job here. And every year it seems to get better and better. And I'm not just patronizing you when I say this is, to my mind, better than any other.
Well, I
You
mean,
wouldn't be happy if it weren't better
well,
than any
I don't want to
other.
say I don't want to go selling a calendar or do a project and say, yeah, this was one of my worst jobs, here. But
Yeah, sure.
that wouldn't make me feel good. And you say, you think that it's not complete. But unfortunately, every subject I work on, I don't have enough room to put the stuff in that I want to put
That's
in.
good.
I mean,
That's-
it's always
that's a-
the case.
That's a good
And
thing. That's a
even
good-
like with this calendar here, I had to make a lot of decisions and take stuff out that just would not fit. And for this calendar and a number of them, I've actually been using inset photos where I'm able to put more photos in
Yeah.
where the calendar part is, just as the minimal. They add to the main subject, but they aren't really good enough for an 8x10.
What do you do? What happens with the money? Now this is being sold for $15.
Yeah, and the proceeds go to Glenwood Cemetery Association, and that's always been that way, and so it goes to the Glenwood Cemetery Association. The proceeds.
It just
It still costs me to produce it, so it's like half going back to the Glenwood.
think about that. I mean, there aren't very many people. You are, how do I put this delicately? You're one of a kind, David. I don't know of anybody, and I know some pretty talented, smart people and people like me who aren't so smart at all, but I don't know anybody who would tackle a project like this, and if they did, would see it through to conclusion. How many hairs have you pulled out in the process of making this one?
Well, every
Were there
every year is
frustrations?
different, but I like to think that every year I do this, I find new things. New pieces of information, and all sorts of stuff that some people may not know. Other times people do know, but
Some of it's hidden.
it's hidden. It's
For
it's
a
in
century,
it's in
there are things you're
yeah.
uncovering.
It's sometimes people know about certain things, and a lot of times you're looking through newspaper clippings or a Whiteside talked to Hugh McClellan in the 1930s. At the end of his life, and told him about all certain things in Champlain that Hugh wrote down, and you find that piece of paper and you're able to throw something in, some information there that you'll never find in the newspaper clipping. So
You would consider yourself an amateur historian.
yeah, history buff, amateur.
History buff. Calvin and I are history buffs, but I don't like to have that shingle hung around my neck because I'm just interested in history. I don't have a memory enough to recall these specific events, but I had somebody call me the other day, for example. Their son goes to school at Potsdam State, let's say, and he wants to do a paper on the Champlain Monument. So the first thing I did was set him straight as to where the first Champlain Monument was, right down the street from where we're sitting in Champlain, and say, don't ask me about Champlain and the monument, talk to Celine Paquette.
And
I'm going to her history house.
Yeah, and like a lot of things, it then went from Celine to me because she sent me a note, says, "Do you want to talk to this guy?" And I said, give him,
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
I didn't know. All I
so
did was,
he's going to contact me
see, there you go.
over
And
Thanksgiving.
if he doesn't get an A on the paper, we're going to get you,
Yeah,
David.
I mean, I got information, material. I know where photographs are.
Well, this guy's a good friend. He was commander of the Post 20 Legion. We've interviewed him many times, and when he called me up, I said, I know just the people. And I should have known she would be contacting you. That's
Yeah.
great. That's wonderful. So what goes around comes around.
Yeah, it's always a circle.
But why, now, is the total focus of this calendar about the boatyards?
No, I'd say half the calendar. A lot of times I'll do an entire essay on one subject, but there were several subjects from the other photographs that I wanted to expand upon. You know, you just can't write a little paragraph this big on the Whiteside paper mill or the Myers building, you know? And with the Myers building, we'll talk about in a minute, I made some unbelievable discoveries that I always wondered about, but I didn't have the time or, you know, to go in and delve the way I did for weeks, you know, on this one subject. But I learned a lot. I figured out that Hugh McClellan, when, you know, the architect here was of the monuments, was the architect for the Myers building and Cedar Hedge Nursing Home. So those are things that I did not know until a month ago, you know, month and a half ago. And so I wanted to devote some of that time of the calendar space to talking about that. So half the calendar is expanded on certain subjects here, Whiteside Paper Mill, Myers Building. Then the other half is on the Champlain boatyards, which there's quite a bit of information out here. Celine has quite a bit of information up here and downstairs, you know, on the boatyards. And we're literally a stone's throw away from one of the biggest boatyards on Lake Champlain.
I can almost throw a stone that far.
Yeah, literally. I mean, it's just right across the street from us.
What I want to do before, in the middle, and after our discussion today is tell people how they can get this calendar. Because already they're excited about
So,
it.
yeah, you don't
How
wanna
can they
wait.
not be? So
Well-
let's talk about it right now, and then we'll talk about it again later. How can they get it?
So the cost is $15 and hasn't changed for a number of years, and that's, you know, there's 15 pages of essay in the back plus the photos. But they're sold locally here. The Town and Village office of Champlain, the Cornerstone Gift in Rouse's Point, the Champlain Memorial Library, over here at the History Center, Conroy's Organics, CCHA in Plattsburgh, and Cornerstone Bookstore in downtown Plattsburgh on Margaret Street. They have that. The bookstore there has, my current calendar. Plus, they have a lot of older ones too on their shelf
And there are
in their history
It's
section.
a good thing to mention because there are some copies left.
Yeah, and there's other. If you want information on the burying yards or the roads and bridges, found it. Survey maps of the Champlain. Those are all in previous calendars, which are sold, at that place, bookstore, as well as Cornerstone Gift and the two village offices and even the library. So most of the places have. Oh, and I should say, Kinney Drugs always is, one of the best places to buy calendars, in the sense that they have a ready supply of the 13s and 14s.
Our viewers to Hometown Cable and Hometown Cable, our little corner in Hometown Cable in general, are so fortunate that we cover these subjects in depth. So that by the time David and Calvin and I finish today, you'll know about this calendar. You will be able to earn at least a B in North Country history and learn so much more than you would if you went to try to dig this stuff up alone.
It won't be a PhD, but it's definitely learning stuff like this. You'll be able to
Information, the history in this calendar, some of it wasn't known to the general population before David uncovered it. You told me that this is a real quest for you every year.
Yeah,
and sometimes when you turn over a stone, you'll see a 3-carat diamond under there.
Yeah, and there's definitely, I'm learning stuff, again, like I said, with the Myers building. There was things I suspected Hugh had worked on. I didn't know to the extent. And that was where the learning experience comes in.
They're
Yeah,
hidden
it's
nuggets. Hidden nuggets.
And what I've said before in the past is, even though I found that information, unfortunately, it was well known 50 years ago or 100 years ago, and of course everyone's gone.
I think of Pike's Cantonment when I think of things that were well known 100 years ago.
Yeah, everyone knew where it was.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden nobody knew where it was, and then we had to have an age of discovery. Where do you want to start?
Okay, we'll start at the very beginning here on the front cover, and then we'll go to January. The cover shows A very, very interesting photograph.
I love it.
And it shows the Route 9B bridge being built. And that's Suzanne Moore's house in the background. It's still there. It was, I think, called the Facette House in the 1800s, early 1900s. And it shows a steam-driven dredge on the lake, or on the river, moving debris and wood. And I looked at this photograph, and I've never seen anything written about it, but looking at it and then looking at my previous calendar from last year, I know that there was a severe flood in 1886, and that wiped out this bridge. And this photograph is not 1900, 1910 like many of the other photographs that I've used. There's no telephone poles in the background.
Aha.
And it just looks like an old photograph. I mean, it's definitely archaic. You look at this steam dredge, it's even though it's steam, a lot of it's still manual. There's a guy turning this giant wheel. There's people on the side. You can see there's actually little kids over to the right on the bank watching this monster, do its work. And
Everybody, even as a kid, we don't even use the phrase steam shovel anymore, but when
Yeah.
I was a kid, watching progress done with a giant, powerful steam shovel,
Yeah.
and here we are.
And what's interesting is this is a modern machine at that time period, because before that, 1850s, the Moore, Royal Corbin Moore and Timothy Hoyle were using a horse dredge to dredge out the Chazy River. So, it's
So you're pretty sure what year it is?
not 100%, but it's definitely not 1900 and, or after. There's no telephone poles. And I know, based on my previous work last year, that the flood that took out the bridge, 1886. And this does look like a 1886 photo. I mean, it could be even earlier, but it's certainly not 1900.
There's so much to see when a photograph is this size.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen things that I haven't seen, but I love to look at it.
Yeah, what's great is you can zoom in on a photograph,
Yeah.
when it's on the computer, and actually look at the kids more closely. And one of the things I do throughout the calendar is if there's something that I'm interested in, like a person standing in front of a building, I'll zoom in, enhance the photograph so you can see it better. So it's not like a 1/4 inch size
Sure,
person,
sure.
it's a couple inches tall, so you can get details. So it's really good that I'm able to do that.
And you labor over what's going to be on the cover of
Yeah,
the
I do,
calendar,
and it's
because
back
that's
and
what
forth.
people see.
Because actually the January photo was going to be the cover photo, I was thinking, last
Oh,
year.
what? Really?
Until I looked at this one and said, my God, this is an action photo, and it's just plain bizarre,
It's perfect and beautiful. Calvin's
Yeah.
never seen it, so certainly I had never seen it.
Yeah,
Where did you find it?
This particular photograph is at the Clinton County Historical Association.
It is.
Yeah. So it was part of another collection, and I was able to use that.
This is a good time just to pause briefly and promote people who study history and preserve history so they can share it with other people. The people from the Historical Association, all the local historians, the Clinton County historian, 3 museums now on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base, Celine Paquette's History Museum for
Yeah.
Champlain up here, and the little people who every day try to dig something up like you dug up for
Yeah,
this.
and what's great is every organization has different material. Celine has a lot of material here.
Individuals
The library, the museums. So what you got to do again is you're taking all this different material and you get permission, and then you're putting it together into one publication.
It's just amazing. Calvin and I, some of the most interesting times we've ever spent are right here at this table and other tables with you and with other North Country people. We did the same in Rouse's Point. We sat around. I was talking with Jerry Favreau about that last night. And we had that kind of discussion at Carol Honig's book launch last night. We're talking with old-time school teachers and people from Cherubusco, and I knew John, and yes, I did learn how to milk cows, and I milked a goat once, and just so much fun. And so Jerry Favreau will be calling Calvin and saying, yeah, but Calvin, She already did? Here's the people we want to get together next
Yeah.
time. All right, so let's go
So
inside.
we'll go to January. And this is a photograph that I've seen before. It's on postcards, and it turns out it was taken by Bird F. Payne Studio, some of many photographs in this collection here, and it shows a rundown paper mill, and he calls it the old paper mill. And I didn't know where it was. I didn't know anything about it. Whose was it? I had some ideas. And I spent a lot of time looking through the newspaper clippings and stuff, and looking through some maps. And I figured out it was the Whiteside paper mill, which is what I suspected before, but I didn't know which one or where. And it turns out, in delving into the history, and Special Collections has a lot of their papers and receipts and stuff like that. The Whitesides are one of the earlier families who came to Champlain, and I'll talk about the Whiteside Thomas J. Thomas came from Cambridge, New York, 1807, and was in business with Pliny Moore right here at the base of this bridge here, in his business called Moore and Whiteside, and that was up to about 1817, and then he started to go into other business, and about that time, 1820s and 30s, the lumber industry started to explode because the Champlain Canal and the Chambly canals opened up, and the lumber industry in Champlain exploded, and a lot of people went into the lumbering business of using sawmills and stuff like that to cut the lumber, ship it down the river from here down to the rapids where they were loaded onto not really canal boats, but like sloops and schooners, and canal boats came a little bit later. So he actually got into the sawmill business. And if we flip to the back, and the way I did this is a lot of these subjects here are expanded upon in the back. So instead of just a paragraph, you actually have a couple
Where do
pages.
you want to tell us where you're going?
Where I'm going to, it says January continued the Whiteside paper mills. You're almost there. Keep going the other way.
Okay, I'm going back. The idea is for Calvin to find it in there. He's got it already. I should have known. Okay.
So what I figured out was the paper mills are, of course, on the Perry's Mills Road, going out towards Perry's Mills. And it was between the road and the river. And you can see it on the Beers map. There was 3 different mills. And then I have an aerial photograph showing where the mills had been, and today there's nothing there. The mills actually stayed around till about the 1930s, and I think people here still remember some of the stonework. But what happened was, by the 1950s, the timber industry in Champlain has started to dwindle because there wasn't really a lot of large trees left. And most of the trees have been cut down, usually shipped down to Whitehall or down to New York City on the canal boats and stuff. So the Whitesides decided to get into the paper mill business. They made paper, and they established a company, and that was the father with the sons, John Henry Whiteside and Frank Whiteside and Alexander Whiteside. So John Henry and Alexander were the 2 sons of Thomas. Alexander built the stone house on Oak Street, which is just up the road from us, in 1817. It's the oldest house on Oak Street and one of the oldest in the village of Champlain. John Henry built the house that is where Champlain Telephone is today, and apparently the house was present up until the late 60s, early 70s, and then it was torn down. A convent was built there by St. Mary's, and then it was later sold to Champlain Telephone, which is the same building. But the John Henry's house is gone, and I was able to show some pictures of what the house used to look like, as well as the where it is today. But in any case, John Henry Whiteside and Alexander, with their father, formed the Champlain Linen Company. Okay, and they basically made paper and other material, and they actually imported a lot of hay from all around here. The farmers in this town sold hay to the Whitesides, and then actually hay was being brought down from St. John's, Quebec, to Champlain in this time period. They then went into was, making manila paper and stuff like that, which was like a packing paper. And this is back up into the 1880s and 1890s. So this was a big business, and they actually converted their old sawmills, which wasn't really making, sawing timber anymore, making it into paper mills, where, modern at the time, where everything was controlled by steam. Steam went all over the place. But one of the interesting photographs I found was the Sanborn map that actually showed
In the lower
in detail.
right-hand corner of the January
Yeah,
page.
it
there
showed
now.
on the other page there, Calvin.
Yeah,
It showed
right
the exact building that I was looking at on the January photograph. So I was able to figure out the view with the arrow here. And behind that building, which was abandoned, it was the abandoned flax factory, was the main paper mill. And what's amazing about this area here, no one really knows, is just the amount of water power that was used, derived from the Chazy River here. A lot of flumes and stuff, and tunnels and piping and all that were all over the place. Perry's Mills, the village of Champlain, on the upper bridge, going out toward the west part of Main Street. That was, there was trenches and flumes all over the place, and because there were so many different grist mills, sawmills, etc. in this area here, and of course all of it's gone now. But the industry was huge, at the time, 1820s to probably 1900.
Great.
So yeah, so that's January. So then we'll go to February.
Okay, I'm ready.
February is where I actually can say I learned a lot. That was the F.W. Myers Brokerage Company and Customs House, and I knew about what the company was, and I obviously I drive by the building all the time, and I knew that there was some information in the archives about that building that Hugh McClellan had in his architectural, boxes and stuff. But I didn't know if he renovated it or if he built it or what. So when I started delving into the subject, I found out that a little history about the Myers building, and then I also found out about the company itself. But so F.W. Myers was founded by John Myers about 1860, and he was the first Meyer. He was an Irish immigrant, came to the United States, and came to Burlington, and then made his way to Champlain, worked in the railroad business, and then realized that Rouse's Point did not have any brokerage businesses, which you need when you're importing goods from Canada to the United States. So he formed his own company with his son, F.W., Frank W. Myers, and then Frank had a son named John Myers. And so John and his son Frank were in business partnership from about 1882, I think, to the year he died, 1908. So in 1907, John Myers wrote a letter to Hugh McClellan saying, "I'm interested in building a new building. I want you to be my architect." So within a month, Hugh McClellan, who had a business in New York City with two other partners, and this is literally at the same time he's building the Champlain monuments, 1911.
See that?
Yeah, literally at the same. I mean, talk about multitasking, because you're building a house here, and then you're dealing with the two monuments, not just one. With a deadline of July, 1912. A big deadline because it's an international celebration.
Of course.
So anyway, there's three partners, so it wasn't just Hugh, but anyway, the firm designed a building that I would view as a federal style building, and or a style from the federal style, which was early 1800s, and they were designing the building almost at the same time they were building it. And a lot of times the work was done in New York City, the blueprints were put on the train in New York City. The next morning their blueprints were in Rouse's Point. A lot of the supplies and stuff, like the ironwork, the metal columns, etc., all came up from New York City because Myers was having a hard time procuring a lot of stuff, locally here. And even some of the contractors, the heating contractor, electrician, etc., was all bid out to people around the area. I mean, not just local. So anyway, the building took about a year to build, and you can see the two other photographs of it later where it was used as the brokerage and customs house. The customs house, which is government owned, was there until like 1934.
Uh-huh.
Originally, I don't know if it's true, but half the bottom floor was going to be Myers's office, and he had a nice fireplace inside there, and the other half was supposed to be the post office. So they designed it as a post office, and then the upstairs was the customs house. But by 1923, the post office was in another location, and the First National Bank was in this building here. So if we flip to the back again.
Okay.
Let's talk about that picture first for the auctioning the cars.
Yeah, that's a U.S. Marshals sale, so obviously it was probably like a prohibition. It was probably stuff that was confiscated.
Oh,
during,
no kidding.
If you're obviously smuggling,
Leave it to Calvin to notice that.
like
yeah.
today, where if you smuggle drugs in a car, you could forfeit your car. So this area here was very well known for smuggling and bootlegging. I've seen this photo and another photo, another postcard like this here from a different view, showing the auction. So obviously a lot of people here are wanting to get some very cheap cars,
Oh, and they still do these days when they have their auctions, don't they, huh?
Yeah.
Excuse me for coughing. All right, where are we going?
So we're going to the back, and we're going to the February one.
February in the back. All right.
So that's this picture here,
Yep.
showing the Myers building. So anyway, looking through the correspondence, there was a couple folders of correspondence between Myers and Hugh McClellan,
Yep.
back and forth talking about the particulars of the building, can't get it, supplies, etc. But the first picture here shows the Myers building main design,
Uh-huh.
and it says Hugh McClellan Architect. Below is one of those, is another photograph, shows the Myers building, the words Myers building, and every time you drive by that building, you see the name Myers building. It's an iconic sign because it just stands out, black on white there. And well, lo and behold, I find the actual blueprint for that sign.
Isn't that beautiful?
And then
1907.
Yeah, and then if you look in the paperwork, there's a couple letters back and forth about how to design the sign. Hugh was saying that iron letters rust, wooden ones warp and crack, and enamel and glass are out of the question, probably because they're too expensive. So I'm not really sure what they used, but it certainly lasted 100 years.
And you don't know what
I don't know what
Isn't that
what it was
interesting?
made out
Yeah.
of. There's no letter that says, but it looks sort of like wood or something. I don't know. But they were talking about the contractor to use who had the letters, etc., and whether it would be custom made or off the shelf design of the letters. And one of the crazy things that I found, and this is one of those things where I enjoy finding, is if you look on the top of the pediment of the Myers building are two molded pieces of wood, and they're called triglyphs. And the triglyphs are a Greek style. It's on the Parthenon, exactly the same. And it's a federal style design, and it's actually from the Pliny Moore house right across the street here.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, and that's what I have in my picture here.
Oh,
The Clark Funeral Home
Yeah, sure.
has the exact same smaller version of the pediment with a cornice. And then I show in that bottom picture what it looks like today, and then I show on the left half of the photograph what the blueprint shows. So I was looking at the blueprint, and I've driven by that building 1,000 times, never noticed it because I'm never looking up at it. And when I'm looking at the blueprint, I realized that what this was, it was a triglyph So I went up here and took some pictures, and lo and behold, it's a larger version of what I've seen before, across the street here. So he got the design from the Pliny Moore House here in town.
That's wonderful.
That's a great little thing.
Yeah, I love it.
So anyway, we flipped the page, and still talking about John R. Myers. He was a very successful businessman, an expert on tariff law. He was Rouse's Point mayor a couple times. Town of Champlain, became the county legislator, or the board of supervisors, and he was on numerous other smaller commissions. President of the First National Bank in Plattsburgh, and then Rouse's Point. In any case, by 1911, he decided to build a new house or modify an existing house, and this is where it got a little bit confusing, because I had to read the letters 3 times and look at the blueprints about 3 times to figure out what was going on. But he lived in a house which is basically the Cedar Hedge Nursing Home today, the older building.
Or
And-
was, yes.
Yeah, it was before they built the other building next door to it. And he basically modified his residence, and it wasn't built from scratch. What I figured out was he moved an existing house, and I had the pictures of it in one of the photos here. He moved the house from closer to the lake, further back onto the lot, onto a new foundation. And then Hugh McClellan, of course, was the architect for this. And Hugh added the tower, which you've seen, it stands
sure.
out, and added the wraparound porch, which is actually the same type of wraparound porch on the Garrick House here in Champlain, and added a servant's wing and a large kitchen. And so there was a lot of work. Mrs. Myers wanted a dining room that could seat 25 people, so they made a huge dining room. They rebuilt the roof, moved the dormers around, expanded the back. So I'm not sure. The original house was still there, and I don't know when it was built. But one of the other amazing things was he had bought the property next door where the newer Cedar Hedge was, and there was another house there which was called the Ferguson House, and that house was again close to the road, and he tore that house down at the same time he was renovating this house here, and he used a lot of the wood molding from the old house in his new house, Cedar Hedge, and some old tubs and stuff like that. And there was a lot of correspondence about trying to match the stain, and using the old sills from the house, the wooden and the stone sills. Stone was actually brought in from Isle La Motte, the quarry.
No kidding.
Yeah, so you can add that to the numerous projects, including Fort Montgomery and the church, etc., that the quarry, the Fisk quarry in Isle La Motte, was used for. And then toward a couple months after the working on the house, Myers was interested in building a pergola, which is like a wooden lattice fence and gardens and stuff, because he owned the whole next lot to the south. And Hugh designed an elaborate, this is where unfortunately I didn't have enough room, but an elaborate garden, and there was a foundation for the Ferguson house, which was obviously concrete or so, that Myers couldn't remove, because back in those days it would have been hard to remove a concrete or stone foundation. Today it's easy, with a big tractor. So he wanted to make a sunken garden out of it by filling it in, putting like fountains and stuff like that. And there were some nice pictures, and you can see the drawing here shows the layout.
Bottom, yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably where the parking lot is of the other building, the other property.
Yeah, sure.
And I know the building's in the back, but at some point the lot was divided into multiple lots or so and sold off. But I wonder how much of this pergola was built. This is 1911, 1912.
Yeah.
You can kind of see it. It's certainly different than it is today, because there's another building on the lot. Also, showing the design here, there was a couple different designs. Hugh designed it with one tower and then with two towers, and which is in the rightmost photograph. The two towers were more symmetrical, and as Hugh said, it makes the building look like it was designed originally that way. But it wasn't built that way. Only one tower was used. There was some question of whether to put the kitchen east-west or north-south. That's the building in the very back, and that was built from scratch. So anyway, it was, I think those two drawings I show here are kind of merged into what became the final drawing, which is shown in the diagram of the grounds. Each one's a little bit different. But yeah, I learned a lot because obviously I did not know, more than 2 months ago that Hugh had anything to do with the old Cedar Hedge nursing home.
Once again, the dots.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sure.
And, there's a lot of stuff he did in Rouse's Point. The Chapman house he worked on, which is, I think, nearby, has that huge parking lot with the tower on top. He did some renovation there. I'll also mention that Hugh was the architect for the Rouse's Point High School there. I think it's, elementary school now? Or
I think so, yeah.
maybe it was a high school before in the old days. But, he was the architect for that. He was the architect for the Champlain Elementary School here on Elm Street. He did the Moores High School in Moores. I was just looking at the blueprints yesterday. This room that we're in, he added the second story. If you look at a lot of the building, the photographs of this bank with the first one story, that was added in 1905.
Uh-huh.
The second story. So there's a whole list of things. The Knights of Columbus building he completely renovated, 1910, here right next door to us. So there's just so many things, and I could do a calendar just on that.
Maybe you will someday.
I thought about it. Yeah.
Who knows?
So
Before we go, we should point out that this Cedar Hedge is now a bed and breakfast, and the main nursing home part is going to become an assisted living.
Oh,
Yeah,
is it? I wasn't aware of the updates.
yeah, I know. Yeah, it was. I saw it was in the paper, Press Republican, like a year ago.
Uh-huh.
And what's weird about the Cedar Hedge nursing home, and it was in that one of my pictures there, is when he designed the fireplace in the home, it showed the triglyph. That's on the Myers building.
Really?
Yeah,
No kidding.
it's in the design of the molding. I don't know if it was ever implemented, but it was definitely part of the design.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
So again, one of those weird little connections there. We'll do. I guess we'll do April. We'll do. We'll do March. And the March one is a little bit later photograph, 1910 or so, 1909, and it shows the F.W. Avery canal boat, and there was obviously a flood in this case. This is probably taken around March or April, and I was able to connect some dots here where there was a concern back in 1908, March 20th, that the floods in Champlain would damage the boatyard, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and carry down some of the boats, the canal boats that were moored along the river, and obviously this boat succumbed to the ice and river and was carried down to the Route 9B bridge, and there's the same view more or less as on the cover photograph.
Yeah, sure.
Of the Moore
I love
house
it.
in the back. This is, I think, the bridge that was built, after 1886 is probably early 1900s it was built, and it was an iron bridge. It's actually a bridge that rotates, so the canal boats can go through. And at that time period, the bridge had not been rotated.
I can tell.
And I don't know, this boat here was built 1882. Again, it's the F.W. Avery boat.
And those guys on the bridge are the kids that were watching the.
Yeah, sure. Wouldn't
Well,
that
it
be
was
nice if it were?
1886
That
and
could be.
1909,
Yeah, could be. That's great. I
Yeah.
love it.
The April one shows the bank that we're in, two views, and it shows the Bill Earl boat launch. And what we're seeing here is we're on the bank of the river, probably behind like the Champlain Telephone Company. which was really the Whiteside property at the time,
Right.
and because that went right up to the river here, and we're looking directly west, and what we see is the Oak Street Bridge, First National Bank, with one story. So I know it's 1905 or before. It's probably between 1900 and 1905, and you see numerous buildings along River Street, which of course are not here today except for maybe one building. A lot of activity at this site here, and we'll talk about it in a minute. There was the Bill Earl boat launch, which is exactly where the boat launch is for the village of Champlain, right here at the base of River Street. And further to the right of this image, outside of view, is the Averill and Clark Boatyard, where most of the canal boats were built in Champlain. And then in the smaller photographs below, it shows the Bill Earl bike shop and boat launch. And what's weird about this photograph is just how much activity in the early 1900s occurred on the rivers.
Sure.
People lived on the rivers. They moved things on the rivers, and you see very few people now on the river except for recreational use, but it was a major artery for commerce. And in this one photograph, I said there were 16 boats with 13 people in them and one dog. There's kids on this little houseboat, which is right off to the far right. You can barely see it, but it's there. And again, people lived on these boats. People, Champlain Village had a lot of ship captains, boat builders, etc., boat hands, loaders, etc., that living in town, early 1900s. And the bottom picture of the little paddle boat is interesting because this picture, the bottom one, is taken right in front of this building here. This is the bank building, and it's a paddle wheel. And I've seen 2 or 3 photographs of this little boat here.
Beautiful.
The next photograph is May, and May shows what's called Ballew's Pictorial of Boston. And I've seen this photograph before. I was able to find the real newspaper to get a better image, for the calendar versus one of the many photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, things that I've seen around.
Yeah.
It shows the station house, hotel, and steamboat landing. And I didn't really know anything about this place or where the picture was. I looked at it originally, and you can see a railroad tracks, etc. And it's misleading because you first think that it's the bridge to Vermont, but it's not. And I was able to find the maps that showed exactly what the image was. But the station house and hotel was built probably early 1850s or even before, and it was a steam dock, or a steamboat dock, a railroad depot, a hotel, a saloon, a meeting house, and it was huge, 600 feet long, by 100 feet wide. And it was where the Sportsman's Wharf is today in Rouse's Point, and which is now filled in, etc. But this was the huge spot for people going back and forth to Quebec, to St. John's and etc. And then also for going down south to, say, Burlington or Whitehall. And what's interesting is the image is very accurate because I'm able to zoom in on certain things and find out, look at the details of, say, for example, the Methodist Church in Rouse's Point, or the details of the railroad track. And the railroad track was interesting because it started off at the hotel, but actually ran in the water on 3,000 piers to a customs dock. And if we flip the back toward the back, and it's another subject that I've expanded upon.
Somewhere in the back.
After Myers, right here with the steamboat.
Yeah.
Yep. So what we have here is it's a great picture of one of the steamboats in front of the Station House Hotel, which of course is not labeled in this photograph, but comparing it to the other one, it's exactly the same building. You can tell by the dormers.
Oh, sure.
And unfortunately, again, I have so much room on each page, and I wanted to put a couple more images, but ran out of space. But one of the great images I have here is the map, 1857. It shows the railroad track that extends down from the depot, or from another dock a little bit south of the depot, down to this customs house building, which again was in the water. Water was probably only 10 feet deep here, but 3,000 track were basically, and the trains came down, and I don't know why it was used that way, but they would come down to this particular dock and for unloading or etc. But you can see in the first view the where I write the artist's view, and the artist is actually standing on the bridge to Vermont, the railroad bridge, and that's where he's standing to take this image, and then I have a zoom in of Beer's map, 1869,
Yeah.
which doesn't show the track because the track had been removed then, but it shows the depot that we're looking at in better detail. And it was also a customs house too. And then, a couple newspaper clippings about the Station House Hotel, etc. And it was one of the funny little, things you read in the newspaper was there was a big meeting of railroad executives, and they all have to agree on by making these votes and stuff like that. So then when someone came up with a vote for ending the meeting and going upstairs to the saloon, there was no dissenting vote.
Of course not.
Yeah. So that was, I learned a little bit about that. Again, we've seen one of these photos before, and there wasn't really anything mentioned about it. The top photo here just shows a steamboat and a dock, but it was a big part of Rouse's Point history. Is the fact that they're the last village in the United States on the New York side, and a major place for commerce coming into going to Canada. And the steamboats went from Rouse's Point to Whitehall and to Burlington, and it was a big industry.
And we should point out that track came down and ended up just a little bit north of the Saxony, is where that bottom part of the track is.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And again, there's nothing really except for the docks that stick out of the, to the lake now. There's no, evidence of any of this stuff here, anymore.
I love it.
So the next photograph is June.
Okay, I'm going to turn the page. Oh, this is great.
This is a great photograph.
It really
even though
is.
it's not a great, it wasn't the best in terms of visual, clarity. I had to use this because it's one of the oldest photographs I've seen of the village of Champlain, taken probably 1850s to early 1860s, definitely not late 1860s. And it shows a view that we've seen many times before in other photographs, but many things are not here, and some things are. And what's interesting is the bank building that we're in here today, which was built 1880, it's not in this picture here. And we know from 1869 map that there was a office. Dr. Coit had an office here. It was probably a wooden building. That's not present either. What we see is the Knights of Columbus building, and which is owned by the Nyes, my relatives, from about late 1848 up until the 1950s. So this building here is the original session house, which is the Knights of Columbus Hall. It's it's a small building, but it's wide, and of course then the addition was added in the parking lot. But what you see here is one of the older bridges, and then you see the session house. In the background, you see the St. John's Episcopal Church. It's a wooden church, wooden steeple that burned down in 1904 and was rebuilt. Off to the right, you see the Plennymore store, and you see a lot of photographs of this building with the addition on the side, which was a warehouse, which later became the bowling alley, which people may remember today. And there was also a gas station there too. Anyway, that building is in its original form. That's Plennymore Jr., the son of Plennymore, who lived into the 1870s. And in the background is, of course, the Plennymore original house. And you can see a small fence line going around it, which is seen in an 1829 painting, which was in one of the, I think, last year's calendar or so. And so there's a lot of things in this picture that are quite interesting. And, you know, the most glaring thing is the building that we're in, which is in almost every photograph of this spot, is not here.
There yet.
Yeah, and I include a couple maps from various years, 1849, 57, and 69, you know, showing, you know, this corner here that we're at.
That's great.
Yeah. July 2014. So what we have here is, obviously, I like to put in, pictures of parades and stuff for the July 4th celebrations, and it shows a young boy standing right here, almost where we are on Main Street, in front of near the Champlain house, which is not here. The other building in this to the right is still present, and it shows one of the many parades that Champlain, you know, has had for many years. And what's weird about this photograph is maybe the theme was, you know, to make makeshift floats or something, you know, of a certain style. But obviously this is not your standard float. It's completely makeshift. There's no real wheels on it. It's barrels for wheels.
Look at the barrels. Isn't
Yeah,
that
and
great?
if you look closely, there's a person on top under an umbrella, but that's just a mannequin. That's not real. The person controlling the horse is kind of hidden behind some leaves and tree branches and stuff like that. And it's a big horse. But you know, a lot of people here in the village, you know, looking at this parade. Of course,
What a
it was
great
a
shot.
dirt road, you know.
Yeah, sure.
And then on the bottom photographs or the images, you know, is a little article that Noah Moore, my relative, had put in the paper for the opening of the Champlain Academy. That was opened 1842. You know, education in Champlain was very big, and Champlain and Plattsburgh were the only two, you know, villages in the county that had academies, which were, you know, credited by the regents of the state of New York, even in the 1800s. And the Plennymore Jr. gave the land for the creation of the academy, which was right here on Elm Street and Prospect Street. And that burned down, you know, 1941 or so, the second building. And, you know, then also, you know, in looking at this, the celebrations here, there used to be fireworks, you know, even 1800s. You know, 1883, James Averill Sr., who was in charge of a lot of things here, he was in charge of, you know, the parade and the fireworks, etc. So, you know, these celebrations were really big back in those days. So the next subject, of course, is the Champlain boatyards, and this is the other half of the calendar, and it shows. What I wanted to do was, you know, there was numerous photographs that we have of the canal boats, the barges, the yachts, and I knew very little about this subject in terms of the, you know, what was made. I knew Champlain was really big in the canal boat business, and you see a lot of stuff, but I didn't know just what the names of the boats were and who made what, and you know who, you know, and you know where they were made exactly. So when I started looking at this subject here, I was able to connect all the different pictures that are around. You know, either at special collections. Celine here at the History Center has a big collection of you know, postcards and photographs of the boat industry, and a lot of it was taken by B.F. Payne, and around 1908, 1909. Now, what's interesting is none of these photographs have labels on them. You know, sometimes they say boatyard, doesn't tell you where, and it doesn't tell you the name of the boat. So I was actually able to connect the dots by looking at other photographs that were labeled and even newspaper clippings to figure out what boats these might be. So this is probably one of the best photos I've ever seen. And Celine has this at the History Center for August, and it shows the Averill and Clark Boatyard. So I'll talk a little bit about Boatyard. Well, I'll talk about this particular picture here. But Averill and Clark, it's James Averill Jr., who was actually an insurance agent, and then he went into business and actually bought what the Finley Ironworks, and with a partner, Sylvester Alonzo Kellogg, who was also a Champlainer. He and Averill bought the foundry here in town in the 1870s. They owned it for a few years, and then they sold half interest to Sheridan. Okay, and then Sheridan bought the full business. So we're talking about the boatyard and the foundry being owned by the same people at one time, and the Sheridan growing to be what it became in the 1900s.
All right, what do you say we pause for just a moment? Now we pause for just a moment to determine the pronunciation of Averills.
Averill or Averill?
So we're now back to Averills. That's the real way to say it. Okay, go ahead.
So anyway, Champlain was a huge builder. The town of Champlain,
Yeah.
even the village too, was a huge builder of boats along, for that were used on Lake Champlain here. This particular image, which was August again, shows numerous boats. It's 1, 2, 3, at least 4 barges, a canal boat, and then a houseboat. And again, there was nothing telling me what these boats were. And what I found through looking through the literature, the newspaper clippings, and if we flip the photograph to September, it shows what's called the Johnson Houseboat Winona at the Averill and Clark Boatyard.
Averill.
Averill.
I love
got
it.
me.
You say potato, I say
Yeah,
potato.
you say Grenada, I say
Yeah,
Grenada.
yeah. So the Averill and Clark, and this is the Johnson Houseboat Winona.
Yeah, and Johnson was a person lives south, I think, in the Port Henry area, but
Nice boat.
it's a very nice boat. Well, we haven't even got to the Witherby boat. That's nice.
That's even nicer.
So anyway, so this boat here was built, is shown, at the boatyard, and next to a barge, etc. But what's interesting is the previous photograph, and I was able to zoom in on the bottom
down
inset,
below, yeah.
shows the same boat being constructed with a lot of men. If you look at all the people on that boat, who were responsible for building it. But I associated the name of the boat with the picture when I finally found a description about a houseboat, and it said everything they described about made sense, and it said including a smoking lounge placed on top, and that's probably this particular little building that that you see on top under the canopy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, where are we?
We'll do October.
Okay, let's go to October.
And the October shows the Witherby houseboat, Silouan, I think, at the Averill and Clark Boatyard.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, David.
And again, there was no pictures associated with any of these, or no captions associated with it, and you don't see it on the photograph. But again, looking at the material in the the newspapers, I was able to associate this with the Walter Witherby houseboat. And I'll tell you what's amazing there's 2 things amazing about this houseboat. Number one, number one, I found in the archives at the college library. Guess who the architect of this houseboat was?
No, come on.
Yeah, swear to God.
You're kidding.
Hugh
me.
McClellan, the architect.
He even did houseboats.
He did. That's the only one I know of. But if we flip to the back, I believe.
Okay, we're moving around again.
Yeah. It's very close to the very back.
I got it. Abraham
And-
Clark Boatyard.
Yeah, and it shows the Johnson houseboat, and it shows the Silliwan houseboat. But anyway, the Witherby houseboat we were just talking about, I found the design, the blueprint.
Oh my
And
goodness.
you zoom in, it says, Hugh McClellan, 1907.
Gee whiz.
And
That blows my mind.
yeah, he
This
designed.
was quite a guy.
This was
wasn't
probably
he?
one of the biggest houseboats on the lake.
I'm sure.
And Witherby, was a big industrialist in Port Henry. Had mining interests and stuff. He was also on the Tricentenary Commission, the treasurer. And believe it or not, President Taft was on this boat.
Oh, really?
Yes, this boat, this
Ooh.
particular, it's not this particular picture, but during the Tricentenary celebrations, Witherby, who was one of the major commissioners here in Lake Champlain, he took the, Taft's children and his wife and his children on a houseboat cruise. And then I guess I found another article that said that he entertained President Taft on his houseboat in front of the Champlain Hotel.
There it is.
Yeah,
Look at
it's
there,
not
right?
this particular picture, but
You
but
can see the hotel
it's
on
the
the
hotel.
bluff.
Yeah,
Then it
But-
burned down.
it burned down and was rebuilt a year later.
Now there's another incarnation these days, and it's called Clinton Community College.
Yeah,
And
So-
Witherby would be from the Witherby and Sherman mines.
Sure.
yeah, that's all related.
Absolutely.
Port Henry. But anyway, he could afford at that time probably the biggest houseboat on the lake.
I
And
guess.
what was interesting about the houseboat, and I didn't didn't know it at the time when I wrote this until right before going to print. But the article about the houseboat said the Witherby houseboat was a remarkably fine example of the designer's skill in getting the most in comfort and convenience into limited space. I wrote that down, didn't realize that was Hugh McClellan. Because there's no reference
There you
anywhere.
go, the dots are being connected
The dots
again.
are being connected,
I love
yeah.
it. That's great.
And speaking of Witherby and the Tricentenary, etc., the November photograph shows the Tricentenary celebrations, and James Averill Jr., who owned the boatyard here in Champlain, conceived of the idea of building barges and linking together 6 barges to make a floating Indian pageant, which you've seen in some photographs
Oh,
and postcards.
yes. Yep.
And 200 Indians from Quebec were put on a pageant in Burlington, Plattsburgh, Rouse's Point, Isle Lamont.
We've heard Celine talk about that in the
Yeah,
past. Yeah, that's amazing.
Crown Point there.
That's amazing.
And but it was his idea to do it, and he built the barges. He worked with Witherby, and there was 3 or 4 photographs of the barges being built, or the pageant being built. But this photograph here, the main photograph shows workmen on the building the set right now in a little tugboat, which was kind of a cool picture. And then there's some inset photos show some big guys. I don't know who the person is, but it could be Averill, or it could be Witherby. Inspecting the progress of the boat. They were starting to build the boat in March, and obviously in July they were done because it was used in the celebrations.
Oh, I love it. That's great.
The next photograph, which is December, and then we'll talk about a little bit more about canal boats
Okay.
after this, is what was called the Allison Block Building. Okay, the Allison Block Building is still present. It's right across the street from us. It was built in the early 1860s, probably, or even late 1850s, by William Allison, who died shortly after. and it went to his wife, and it was always known as Allison Block. And the building's still present. It had a fire, I think, in the 1990s, and it's sort of 2.5 stories now instead of 3. But this is one of the oldest photos I've found, which is seen around. Is actually it's behind Calvin right now, the picture, but it's a different version of it. It's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. But this particular one is a better quality, and it shows 3 businesses and something crazy going on in this photograph. And at the bottom is the meat market. And the meat market was run by William Maynard. William Maynard is the great-grandfather of Marshall Maynard, who lives in Chazy.
Yeah.
I don't know who the little boy is, but his father was down there, and and meat market was down in the basement because of cold storage. And then in the 2 stores on the first floor is William Graves' store, and then H.C. Deal. Deal and Graves are 2 big-time merchants, late 1800s, early 1900s. Now, if you look at that photograph, do you see a iron stove hanging on the side of the?
Yes, I do.
And I've seen that picture. It didn't
So
really,
have I.
and you don't really know why it's there. It's obviously bizarre, and of course the answer is it's William Graves sold iron stoves.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's actually
better way to advertise it than
yeah.
hang
So
one.
if we flip toward the back,
We're flipping again.
flip toward the back, and where I went into more detail about the Deal store, the meat market, and the Graves store, you can actually see one of a zoom of the iron stove, and then as well as the Graves and Son
I see
letterhead.
It. I see it. Way near the back.
Yeah, and at the very back it shows the Graves and Son with the stove, and later years it was the American House, and then it was the American Hotel in the 1930s. In the other store, it was the Deal store, which was on the first floor, and that was H.C. Deal, Henry Clinton Deal. He had a house and building on Cedar Street, and that's what's seen in the smaller photograph of his. I think that's the Deal family standing in front of the house. None of these buildings are present today.
Well, that's on
The
top,
big
okay.
building on the right is still present, the brick building.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, in the far right, this one here.
Yeah, I see it.
And the H.C. Deal house and his store were there. And then 1886, he moved to the Allison house, and that's what one of the little, advertisements I have
Yep,
showed.
I see it.
Yeah. So
Furniture, coffins, and caskets.
yeah, so these stores here, in this time period, they sold everything.
Oh, sure.
I mean, they're selling hardware, funeral services, and insurance. In the same people.
Yeah.
And caskets and
Oh, yeah.
fancy goods and juvenile and fancy goods, etc. Pillows.
Furniture, wallpaper, bedding, carriages,
Yeah.
wagons,
Yeah, because
coffins,
obviously,
and caskets.
when you needed supplies, 1890, you weren't going to go drive to Plattsburgh or someplace.
No, we didn't have malls either.
Yeah, there's no malls. So anyway, that's on the month. So I wanted to go into a little bit more detail
Sure, whatever.
on
Before we leave, I want to update on that building.
the building. Is actually is still occupied as apartments today, and I think in the 1990s we were trying to determine there was a fire on the 3rd floor, and it was they put a sloped roof on it and kind of made it, I think, into a 2.5-story building. During the 1860s, the Masons were actually in that 3rd floor. Mrs. Allison
we talked about that.
Mrs.
once.
Allison
Yes.
rented out the 3rd floor to the Masons, and her husband had been a Mason before. Of course, the Masons were then in the Champlain Hall building, the Nye building, across the street here, which is still present. That was built by Bartlett and Freeman Nye. But there's many different pictures of this Allison building that I've seen, and I was able to put together, 3 or 4, maybe 4 different images of this building at different times.
Yes, it was became the Robin's Nest, and then over the years you had the fire, you had a lot of flooding, and now Chad Poyer is the one who.
Yeah, I
fixed
mentioned Chad, I think here, and so it's one of the buildings that's that's endured for so many years on downtown here. And it's a sturdy building. It's
Oh, yeah.
if you look at it, if you look at the the foundation, it's a sturdy building. So anyway, we'll skip to the back and where we start talking a little bit more about the canal boats.
Okay.
And that's actually an extension of a previous month, August.
Yeah.
So, with Station House on the top there.
Yeah.
So anyway, obviously I learned a lot about the boat building here in town, and the boat building in town started in the early 1800s as I think a matter of necessity, where you had merchants in town who needed to move their supplies back and forth from Champlain up to St. John's down to Whitehall. Now, all of this happened at the beginning of the openings of the two canals. You had the Champlain Canal open, and then you had the Chambly Canal in Quebec open about the same time, 1830s up to 1820s to 1840. And previous to that, people could only move supplies in carts or on small boats up to Chambly, but then you had the rapids, and then of course within Lake Champlain, you couldn't get to the southern markets like Albany or New York City without the Champlain Canal. So this area here was very limited in what could be shipped out of this area. So some of the first merchants in town were Freeman and Bartlett Nye, the two brothers, early 1800s, 1820s, 1830s, and they owned a lot of farms on both sides of the border. They built many of the brick buildings here in town. They bought the Session House, and that's a Columbus building, late 1840s, etc. They built, I think, some of the first boats, which was the Champlain schooner, and then the General Scott. General Scott was very well known on Lake Champlain. It was a schooner, and with a sail. Those were small boats that had sails, and I figured they were built right here, stone's throw away from our property. They were built on the Nye's property, which extended down from the Savoy down to the river. And that same property later became Averill and Clark's boatyard. So it's no coincidence that the two boatyards were the same. But anyway, the General Scott was commanded by a captain named George Brown, who was very well known in town. And it ran from about 1839 up until the 1860s. And it was moving stuff between Champlain and Whitehall, seems to be the major, routing point. And then it was, stuff was moved down to New York City. So you could have all sorts of stuff. Supplies were coming back and forth, up into Champlain, and then manufactured supplies, paper, wood, lots of lumber. I mean, if you're looking at all these shipping receipts for the General Scott, 10,865 pine boards are
I love it.
placed on one boat.
Yeah.
And so they were shippers. A lot of the shipping was done down at the Moore and Hoyle boatyard. That was a little bit south of here where the rapids are, where Goki Road is. And the Moore and Hoyle built a channel out into on the side of the river, and it's partially still present today. It's been kind of filled in, but it shows a lot of boats and stuff were there, and I'm wondering how much what type of boat building was done there too, because it was a sheltered port. The ice and floods couldn't get to it, and that was a long channel. So anyway, there was actually, I think, three different phases of boat building in Champlain. The first people to build boats were like Bartlett and Freeman Nye, 1830s. And then 1850s, 1860s, you had Moore and Hoyle either building boats or purchasing boats and using their wharves as the biggest area for shipping of lumber and stuff. And there was, lumber would be cut up the river here and then floated down to the lumber yard, then loaded onto canal boats and sloops. Then Moore and Hoyle, they died, 1860s, 1870s, and Timothy Hoyle, who's part of the Hoyle, Moore and Hoyle, he actually was president of this bank here that we're in, First National
really?
Bank. Yeah.
Oh.
So he was bank president, and he was actually first mayor of the village of Champlain, and then he ran the business here of the wharves. And when they left the picture, 1860s, 1870s, this is where James Averill comes into the picture.
Or
Averill.
Either way.
I love it.
James, you say Grenada, I say Grenada.
Yeah.
So anyway, James Averill comes into the equation. He's born 1850s, so this is well after the establishment of this business on the river here. But he got into business very early, and I was into the insurance business. Age 27, buys the foundry, which became Sheridan. Age 27, with his partner, Sylvester Alonzo Kellogg. Now all these guys, Finley, they bought it from Finley and Smith. All these guys went to the Episcopal Church, here down the road here. So they all knew each other. In any case, the Averill and Kellogg, it was known as Averill and Kellogg's Boatyard, 1880s, 1890s, early 1900. And if you look at the newspaper clippings, over and over again, they're talking about canal boats being built, yachts being built, houseboats, barges, and this seems to be the golden era for Champlain's boatyards, and boat building. It started off slow probably in the early 1800s, but it was really 1883 when he established this business up until about 1910. And there's hundreds of boats that were built here up on this river here, just a stone's throw away. And then Alonzo Sylvester dies, I think around 1904, and then he gets in partnership with John Clark, who also was a church member with him. And it was known as Averill and Clark's Boatyard, which you see a lot in the newspaper clippings, Averill and Clark's Boatyard over and over and over. And if you flip the page, you can see his letterhead. It says Averill and Clark Boat Builders.
Uh-huh.
And so by this time, after a few years of owning the boat building business, the Averill and Kellogg sold their half interest. They sold half a interest into the ironworks to the Sheridan brothers, as I mentioned before. And then a few years later, the Sheridans bought the entire business. But Averill actually continued at the Sheridan and was his vice president and treasurer until he died in 1917. So, although he was working at the Sheridan, he still owned the boatyards, and it looks like Clark was the man who was running the boatyard.
Yep.
And there was a lot of different boats that were built in this area here, and it's too numerous to mention. But one of the big boat builders here was also Allard too, and there was like the Joseph Allard, the Armenia Allor, J.B. Allor, Rosie Allor.
Yeah, we've talked about them in the past before too.
Yeah.
Ray Allen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
and
should.
that was his family that ran that. So it wasn't just Averill and Clark that was building boats. The Allards built several boats just a little bit south of here, on the river here, not too far away, just downriver from where this boatyard was here. So Averill and Clark Boatyard was where the Nyes, I think, built their first boats, which is exactly where the sewage treatment plant is today. If you look at the maps, and I was able to find 3 or 4 pieces of information that conclusively said the Averill and Clark boatyard was where the sewage treatment plant is
There you
today,
go.
including a map. And if you flip the page, I actually found a great article in the Plattsburgh Republican 1908. And again, this is, almost toward the end of the golden period for boat building. And I think a year or 2 later is when the boat building started to subside. But the article talks about the Walter Witherby houseboat, being overhauled a couple times, about the boat. But they talked about the ferry boat at Larrabee's Point. I know they also built the Twins ferry boat for Shazy Landing. But what I did was I took 3 or 4 different images here, and if you look at the maps there, Calvin, the image on the left shows where the Kellogg and Averill boatyard is, okay, which was the Averill and Clark boatyard, and it's actually on the Sanborn map of 1891, and again that where it says boatyard, on the original map, that's where the sewage treatment plant is today.
Okay.
It's just a little bit further past the River Street, the dead end on River Street, and where John Earls had a boat launch there, which is still present. Now, the little tiny map above that shows that Freeman and Bartlett Nye, 1869, owned that property. So that's why I think the General Scott and some boat building was done at exactly the same site, and it later became Averill's boatyard. And because across the street was the Savoy, which the Averill's built. The next photograph on the right-hand side shows the Moore and Hoyle's wharves, and that's in 1857, and that's an elaborate set of train tracks and wharves, etc. And I'm not sure how much boat building was done down here, but it was used in the mid-1800s when the timber industry was huge in Champlain to take timber, and I found an article saying that there was piles and piles of timber down here at the wharves, and it's right at the end of Goki Road here on the river. And the train tracks came down from the Sheridan, and before it was the Sheridan, it was still a foundry. It was called Finley and Smith then. And you could unload or load trains with lumber, etc. And what they did was, you can see it in this photo here, they built a channel. They carved, because it's so flat, they built a channel on the side of the river, which was a sheltered port. So you could moor boats there, and without the problems with the ice and floods. And that's right now today more or less a cow pasture, and it's been kindly filled in, so it's really like a pond. You never know that it was multiple buildings here, and it was wharves and piles of wood and maybe some boat building at the site here. So Champlain was, one article I found in the 1800s said Champlain was the town was the second biggest boat building site on Lake Champlain, after Essex, New York, and it said it even beat Burlington and other ports in town.
Wow.
For boat, the number of boats being built, just how many there were, and again there was boats, barges, yachts, and a lot of these pictures I have of yachts and stuff, like the Brudenberg Hilda II, were surely built here, but you don't really see a lot of information. But there's a lot of pictures of boats, and I suspect a lot of these boats were built here at this boatyard. And again, if you look today, there's zero indication of this industry being huge. Champlain Village also had hosted many captains of the boats who were stationed here, but who were all up and down the lake, and the boat builders, the people who unloaded stuff, etc. So it was a big business, and probably about 1919, I read that the last of the canal boats sailed on the river, and then in the 1930s, the state put in the 9B bridge that didn't rotate, and that basically cut off anything.
That was it.
That was more than
Yep.
10 feet high. So, anyway, the boat building industry was huge, and I definitely learned a lot about that industry, which is literally
You've
right across
done
the
a
street.
magnificent job once again with the Averils and the Averils.
Averill, yep. And I
all
learned
these-
something today too.
What?
Averill.
Oh, I learn something every time my feet hit the floor because I don't remember things that I learned the day before. So every day is a challenge. You retain so much of this history. I don't know how
Well,
that happened.
it's good that
Your brain is this constructed far different from mine.
Well, it's good that I just wrote this just a few weeks ago too.
But before you come up here to do the show, you go back and
No.
say, "Oh, isn't it amazing?"
It's
This is not been pre-recorded. Is that what you're saying?
In a month or so, I don't know. I can't guarantee I'll know all this, but
Well, you know what? Our brains do get packed with a lot of things over the years, and I consider it a great challenge just to sit next to you and try to follow you, what the heck you're talking about, on what page it is. But you've done it again. You've done a great job again, and this is a tribute to who you are and what you've done. Some of it's in your genes because you're related to half the people you talk about.
I'm related to
here.
Hugh and Woody McClellan
And the Nyes and
the Nyes, but Hugh and Woody were the archivists and history buffs, and
they were, we can't say enough about them in this program or any other, and we've talked about them how many times.
yeah.
I mean, when I talked to Jim Rochester and he says, "You see this stuff I got in the back room?" I mean, this,
Yeah.
it's tradition.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of history here. And for those people who may not be from Champlain, who may never have visited Champlain, we'd love to have you come up and find out that we're really a hospitable group up here.
Yeah.
And before I started this this little trip with Calvin around 1997 or so, I knew very little about the Northern Tier, except that I loved it up here. I would drive through the area with my kids on a Sunday, as people used to do. But now I know a little bit why it's such a decent place, because so many things have happened here historically. And you have helped us to connect those dots.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of those dots the information's gone now, and it's a matter of reestablishing.
And it is, and the more years that transpire, the harder it is to recover some of this information. I mean, as we're recording this today, in early November 2013, there are #1 stories circulating about the wonderful European art that was confiscated by the Nazis during the Second World War. And when I say millions of pieces of art, in one form or another, were lost. Now, all of a sudden, they took the wall out of an apartment building and found, well, let's just say over $1 billion worth of lost art. By grandmasters, pieces of art that we didn't even know existed. Well, now they're trying to inventory it all. So there are a lot of things that history gobbles up, covers up. I mean, a lot of those beautiful places you've talked about there's not a trace.
Well, I'll tell you a little. The Garrick House, which is what Royal Corbin or Hugh McClellan had designed that I mentioned. They found in the wall the blueprint, Hugh McClellan's blueprint in the house.
Did you tell me that before? Somebody told me
some years
that.
ago.
I love it.
Yeah.
That is so we urge people to go or to look in their attics and cellars. Look, and people pull up a carpet and find a blueprint.
Yeah.
They take a register out of the floor and find somebody's little stash of diamonds that they stuck in there in 1877. So we're discovering all the time.
Yeah.
You're doing that, discovering history, and I want to personally thank you, David, for doing this every year. This is, if a person today were to try to start this collection of calendars, how would they go about?
Well,
Imagine if you got a few $1,000s on eBay, you could. But there are a
Yeah.
few.
yeah,
brand new
like I
maps
said,
existing.
there's a lot of places here in town that sell the full all
Yeah.
the series. I think Celine here has it. Town and Village office of Champlain, Champlain Memorial Library, Cornerstone Book and Gift in Rouse's Point, Cornerstone
Bookshop in
Bookshop,
Plattsburgh,
yeah,
on
in
Market
Plattsburgh
Street,
have it.
yeah.
They have all the older versions, and then they can contact me too, or through the back of the calendar has my contact information, and I have everything up to 2004. 2003 sold out, and I printed 250 and sold out on that one, but
Don't you love it?
yeah, but
Yeah.
the other ones, I still have copies of.
It's terrific. I won't say it's a thankless job because we're thanking you now, and everybody who looks at this will thank you for what you've included in it. All these great photographs. I mean, you've had your little historical shovel with you every day
Yeah.
to try to see what that next rock is going to show underneath it, and it involves some travel time. It involves making contacts at the special collections
Yeah.
at the Feinberg Library
Yeah,
in Clinton
the
County, her
historical-
Historical Association. Celine right here. We're lucky to have her collection of things in this building. I mean, I can't thank Celine enough for what she's done to preserve the history
Yeah,
of this
and
area.
it's basically just about connecting
Yeah.
all this information.
It's wonderful. You've done a great job.
Thanks.
Thanks again, David Patrick.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to Calvin for holding the camera back there, for staying awake for most of the program today. We've enjoyed learning how to pronounce Averill and all the rest. Get your calendar just as soon as you can, and think of the hard work that David Patrick has put in every time you click to another month.
Okay, thanks.
You've done it. Thanks to all of our viewers for their comments and suggestions every time. I like to say at the end that we can only survive by your contribution, so if you can write a generous check and send it to Calvin Castine, Our Little Corner, or just Hometown Cable, 1477 Ridge Road in Champlain, it would be so much appreciated. And who